Well, hello again, everybody. In this next edition of my CArehart Quick Tips series on CF server troubleshooting, this time I'd like to talk about the ColdFusion 10 update mechanism. I realize that Splendor, or soon to be perhaps named ColdFusion 11, is going to be coming out sometime later this year, but people will be running ColdFusion 10 for a long time, and so this will still benefit them. And if you haven't gotten up to it, you'll run into some of these challenges, so I want to try to help you. And you may be on CF10 right now and running into these problems, or perhaps you haven't even tried to do any updates yet. So I just want to talk about a few things in a few minutes. I'll leave some things for another discussion later on. I'll mention that as we get there. So first of all, when you're in the ColdFusion 10 administrator, one way you'll know if you have updates to apply is you should see this starburst up here in the top right corner with a number on it. Now you may not see that and have hotfixes you need to apply, and that's another discussion. Your server may not be connected to the internet, and therefore it may not be able to find out that there are updates. Or you may have told the installation not to configure ColdFusion to watch for updates, and so it's not watching for those updates. And I'll just say that's configurable. First of all, if you click on that, if you see that starburst and you click on it, you're taken to this page. If you don't have the starburst, just go down to the bottom of the administrator in CF10. Let me just make this a little bit bigger. At the bottom of the ColdFusion 10 administrator, you can see this link to server update. And it's a little bit goofy because you don't notice that it's expanded, but there you go, there's server updates. So that takes you to this same page. So you can get to it by clicking on this if you can see it, or by server updates if you can't. And what I was about to say was that if you don't see any updates at all, don't think that means you have no updates to apply. It could mean that you have not done any. If you were to go to installed updates and not see any updates installed, then I'm sorry, my friend, you have not yet applied any updates. So don't stop because you don't see that starburst. And I was saying that the reason you may not see that starburst is that perhaps somebody turned off the checkbox for check for updates. A lot of people never come into this settings page, but there's a lot here. One is, should it check automatically for updates? How often should it check? Oh, and this is saying check, and if you find it, there's an option to have it send you an email. A lot of people don't know about that. You can have emails sent to you. And of course, there's potential problems where maybe your mail server is not configured and it can't send you mail. That's in the mail settings page, and I'll leave you to look into that yourself. And then here, this is the URL that Adobe has set up to be where ColdFusion 10 hotfixes can be reached, and this should be pre-configured. If that was wrong, that would be an issue. If you were to try this URL from the server and it didn't reach it, that would be an issue. Okay, so these are just some of the things that might explain why you may not see any hotfixes, or more importantly, you come to the server updates and you don't see any available updates and you don't see any installed updates. Or you see installed updates, but you're at a much lower number than you know everybody else is saying that there are updates for. Alright, so anyway, what I really want to focus on is, assuming you have some updates, a couple things. First of all, there is an option to check for updates. That's another thing you can do. That will check to see if there's any updates. It's configured by default to check automatically. Second is if there are multiple available updates, you see them down here, and it's kind of an accordion display. And so now there's update 13 and update 12. Another thing I want to say is, for right now, those of us that are running ColdFusion 10 in this, I'm speaking in late March 2014, the latest current update is update 13, and I just want to say there's some confusion about this one. It says this update is only this update is only for users who are on OS 10 Mavics or want to upgrade to it. Well, one thing is, what it really means is there's nothing new in this update unless you're on OS 10. There's nothing new in this update unless you're on OS 10. So if you already have update 12 and say you're on Windows, then no, you don't need to apply it. But if you do apply it, there's nothing wrong. It's not really only for those on OS 10. It, like it says here, it includes support for OS 10. That's what it adds. Okay. So now, in that regard, by the way, if you just downloaded ColdFusion 10 today or yesterday, you don't have any updates installed. and you will find when you come in here that there are all these updates to install. You can just go ahead and do 13. If you want to, go ahead and do 13. It's the latest one. You won't see any starburst with a 1. You can feel confident you've done the latest update. Now there are some gotchas, and I want to talk about this, but only briefly in this particular session. It says here, after applying the update, reconfigure the connector using the WSConfig tool. Now, it's speaking to people who are on OS 10, saying if you do this update, you need to reconfigure your connector. But let's say you're someone who's on Windows. You might interpret all this to think, okay, well, I don't need to do that because I'm not really on OS 10. Charlie said I could go ahead and install it. But time out, that's not quite right. If you look at update 12, which you would get automatically, and by the way, let me clarify, you don't ever have to apply them one after another. I've had people who told me they went through doing one after another. You don't have to do that. Just do the latest. They're cumulative. But here's my point here, is that if you do update 13, you will get update 12 if you had not previously done it. And I happen to be sitting on update 11 just for demonstration purposes. So I'm on update 11. I have 12 and 13 available, and look, it says important, after applying the update, reconfigure the connectors using the WSConfig tool. Now, rebuilding the connectors is a whole separate subject. I'll do that in another session. But the point is, you do need to do it. And the WSConfig tool, and people on Windows can get to it by going to Start, Programs, Adobe, ColdFusion 10 or 9 if you're on 9 still, Web Server Configuration Tool. And I'll just say quickly, don't just click it. In Windows especially, you really need to right-click and run as administrator on the Web Server Configuration Tool. But that's another subject for another day. I don't want to get into that now. Now, I have more that I want to talk about, but I want to keep these videos relatively short, several minutes each. So in part 2 of this series, we'll move on to actually installing the hotfixes and some of the challenges you can face with that, as well as some resources for learning more. All right, until then.